Hello and welcome to the latest in our series of video lessons and lectures on Irish history with a particular view of looking at it towards the junior certificate exam. What we have with today's one is we're looking at early Christian Ireland. So in our last video we mentioned the importance and the arrival of the Celts. Now going on slightly further again, this is the next major development in Irish social and I suppose, for want of a better word, political history. Okay? So we know the Celts were, as well as being a farming tribe, they were a warrior tribe who would have believed in what the church would call pagans now, and would have believed in gods based around nature, based off the land. So what we have to look at here is how does Ireland go from being a polytheistic religion with many nature gods to one of the most Christian countries in the world? And we're going to attempt to answer that. And it's also what you're going to have to look at in your junior cert exam if you have either short questions on the early Christian Ireland or you have it in terms of a monk in your people in history. Now, the coming of Christianity. So we know Christianity arrived in Ireland somewhere around the 5th century. So somewhere around the year 400. It's generally accepted that it's around the year 432 that the Pope had sent missionaries into Ireland. Okay, and what's also important to note is by reaching Ireland and by spreading into Ireland, Christianity had spread now officially further than the Roman Empire ever had. With the Romans, we know from the Latin name for Ireland, which is Hibernia, which translates as the land of eternal winter, and from the writings that are left in Rome at the time, we know although the Romans went into Britannia and conquered Britain and went as far as Scotland with Hadrian's Wall, they felt Ireland was of no value. They felt Ireland, and according to the sources, were pagan people who ate their young, who were savages, barbarians, who couldn't be civilized or who couldn't be cultured. They couldn't be Roman, therefore. Now, we know the Roman Empire eventually fell at the hands of the Saracens, and also Rome had split itself into two between the two empires in Constantinople in the east and Rome in the west. But after the fall of Rome, one thing that did survive was the Christian Church. And to prove its power and to prove itself as the successor, in a way, of the Roman Empire, we now saw Christianity was spreading further to places that the Roman Empire had never touched. One of the examples here is Hibernia, Ireland. So we use the 5th century because the writings tell us that generally the Roman bishop, who was the Pope, sent a man called Palladius as a missionary to start converting the Irish. So we know Palladius was here around the year 432. With Patrick, however, the dates of his birth and the dates of his death vary. Okay, we know that he arrived sometime in the 5th century, but according to sources, that can be anywhere from the early 400s into the early 500s. So we know Patrick was there, and we know he becomes the influential figure in Irish history, or in Irish Christian history, but Palladius was most likely the first. And I suppose the other interesting thing that you note is that Patrick, patron saint of Ireland, had come over from Wales, so that there would have been an element of Celtic culture or Roman culture in him as well. So Patrick's name was Maewyn Succat. Went away to study. He was given the Christian name of Patricius, and that's how we derive Patrick from that instead. And thankfully, because St. Patrick's Day is easier to pronounce and St. Patrick is easier to talk about than if we had a St. Maewyn. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you here, and I'm not going to play it for the purpose of this screencast or this recording today, but just before this slide is you will have a video on St. Patrick. Now, we're not going to play it in this screencast, but what I will do is I will link it in the description to this video, and I will also link it in the comments. What I would say, though, is while it's very good for a general overview of St. Patrick, because we know that there's a variety of dates associated with St. Patrick, the dates here can't be verified, and the dates here aren't accurate, so ignore the dates of birth and the dates of his death because we don't know this, but it's also just good as an overview. Now, St. Patrick himself, patron saint of Ireland, he's the man who you're taught from a very young age chased the snakes out of Ireland. Now, Ireland does not have the climate for snakes. We now know that snakes was most likely a metaphor in this case for the pagans. Okay, So the snakes was the paganism, was the idea of the false gods. Patrick, or Maewyn, whichever way you want to look at it, is a bit of an interesting character too. He was Welsh, captured by the Celts, and sent over to Ireland as a slave. He was, we believe, a slave for 6 or 7 years in Ireland before he escaped. He went and studied across Europe, and he studied and became a Christian or became this priest that we know and devoted his life to Christianity. So he becomes the Bishop of Ireland, and he returns. And we know that he's still captured many, many times, but he keeps escaping. And that, as well as as well as Palladius, Patrick is seen as the first Bishop of Ireland and has this influential role in making Ireland a Christian country it will become. So then the question goes, well, if the Christians are here, what happens to the Celts? So Christianity obviously still brings a lot of changes to Ireland, but knowing what we know about other cultures in Europe at the time, you're still living this Iron Age lifestyle. So that doesn't change, but it's now the system of beliefs changes. What Christianity does is they do the same thing that the Roman gods do when the Romans were bringing their religion into other areas that they conquered. Is that while introducing their gods, or God in this case in Christianity, to make the transition easier and to make people understand it and make the locals buy into it, they adapt local holidays and local religious customs and Christianize them. So this is exactly what happens with the Irish, that all those Celtic festivals become Christianized or become Romanized, whatever you want to talk about it, and that's how they adapt it. But it does mean it's the end of the age of the Druids. Okay? Brehon laws will still be in place, but the Druids, who were seen as the leaders, will be replaced by priests, bishops, and monks. What you will also see now is that it will lead to down the line the formations of the monasteries and churches and how towns and villages spring up and build around that. So, in while religiously it's important, socially and politically it's important for the structure of the country, how the country is redrawn as we know it. So that's why in the 6th century, from the 500s onwards, monasteries start developing. Okay, so people obviously use the monasteries for prayer and the idea of devotion and honor to God. So there's many monasteries founded, and if you're looking at this for the junior cert exam, particular attention to question 3, those short questions. Cite any example once it's an accurate example, but more often than not, you see that question coming up where you're asked to name a monastery and the person associated with. The monastery is named after the saints, so the saint and the monastery have the same name. So it's up to you to just do that research and pick any monastery or name one which you can remember. And I have a couple examples here with Saint Enda and Saint Finian and Saint Brendan and Saint Ita. Now, this is more to do with question 4, the people in history. If you're given a people in history question about early Christian Ireland, you're talking about the work then in the monasteries. So while you open up talking about Patrick and Palladius and the idea of Christianity and how it spread to Ireland, you've also got to talk about the day to day. So if you were a monk in a monastery, you had a chance at an education. You had a chance at learning how to read and write. So the work that you would have done in that scriptorium was very important for spreading the word of God. Okay, not only was it giving you an education, you were also seen as more this missionary work continuing. So they copied these manuscripts. They still used metalworks and they used stone carving that would have been used by the Bronze Age people. But what they did was, because the people couldn't read or write, the monks would copy the Bible stories and transfer them in and draw them into different copies of books. Because again, copying a book had to be done by hand. But what they did was, when they were drawing scenes and important moments from the Bible, they did it in Celtic design and they did it in Celtic style. And this is important again because it's all about the idea, if you're changing religion and if you're changing culture massively, you have to do it in a way that the locals can accept it. And more importantly, not only can they accept it, that they can fully understand it. So the Celtic design starts coming into the Bibles and the work that's also being put into the metal and the stonework. Book of Kells, for example, here. We know the monasteries were strict. We also know the monasteries were what was called self-sufficient, so they lived off the land, just like the Celts did, and produced their own food. And again, if you're talking about a monk, you're looking at things, clothing, long tunics with woolen cloaks and shoes and sandals. That's all we have in early Christian Ireland. Thanks for listening and watching, guys, and we'll be back with another video lesson soon. Take care. Bye bye.